Welcome to Big Tent USA. We really appreciate you joining us tonight. My name is Kitty Douglas, and I'm so proud to host tonight's event with Amanda Zurawski and Tara McGowan, two badass women I truly admire. At Big Tent USA, we put democracy over partisanship. Even though we are still giddy over the vice president's debate performance, especially her scathing rebuke of Trump's claim everyone wanted abortion to be decided by the states. There are 55 days left until the election, so join us in doing something. Write letters, check out our Project 2025 page, and use our Talking Points tool to master difficult conversations on today's issues. And please share all this information with your friends and join us to make a difference. Links will be placed in the chat. Onward to our two guests. Amanda Zurawski was the lead plaintiff in Zurawski v. Texas, the first lawsuit brought by patients challenging a state on its abortion bans since the fall of Roe. She lives in Austin, Texas. Amanda has spent the last 2 years advocating for reproductive rights and abortion access. She has testified in front of Congress, has provided interviews for countless media outlets and platforms, and most recently, perhaps you saw her, she spoke at the Democratic National Convention with her husband, Josh, by her side. Tara McGowan is the founder and publisher of Courier, a fast-growing left-leaning news network with local newsrooms in 10 states. Courier is building a more informed, engaged, and representative democracy by reaching tens of millions of Americans where they are online with factual, values-driven news that inspires civic participation. She also happens to live in Rhode Island, like I do. Courier is a network of state newsrooms whose on-the-ground reporters and correspondents deliver factual and empowering pro-democracy news directly to social news feeds and inboxes of communities who have been left behind by traditional media. Courier is one of the fastest-growing news networks in the country, with over 1.8 million online subscribers, over 250,000 TikTok followers, and an average weekly reach of 12 million Americans online. And if you're not following Courier on your social feeds, I highly recommend you do. Amanda and Tara, thank you so much for joining Big Tent tonight. And we are just thrilled and honored to have you both.
Thank you so much, Kitty. Thank you, Kitty and Julie and everyone at Big Tent and everybody watching. And most importantly, thank you, Amanda. I am so excited to have this conversation with you. I don't have to give much more background because Kitty just did it. She explained our whole model at Courier and why I'm here. But I was really honored to be asked by Kitty and the Big Tent team to facilitate this conversation with Amanda, who has been a personal hero from afar until I met her when Kitty connected us following her story. And her story is very symbolic of the types of stories that I started Courier 5 years ago now to try to get in front of more Americans, not just about abortion and reproductive rights and freedom, but stories about the impacts of climate change, of anti-LGBTQ plus rights, of economic policies and conditions. In the very decentralized state of media today, and especially with the loss of local news across the country, there is a real risk, and we have seen how it has played out with folks losing trust in institutions and in politics and politicians, and most importantly and most gravely in one another. I think it's a big reason for the increase of division and polarization in this country, and local news and information is a neutralizer to that. It is something that really connects people to their communities. It increases civic participation and engagement, and it really does connect people to one another. And stories are how we connect. And it's also how we're going to get past this really dark period in our country where people's lives are on the line because of very, very, very dangerous policies that are being placed in states like Texas that we're going to hear about from Amanda. So I'm just really grateful and honored to be here with all of you and to share a little bit about that work, but most importantly, to help provide another platform for Amanda to share her story. And have a conversation that we want everyone to engage in. We're going to be able to open it up for questions. Please also add them in the chat. But with that, I think we'll get the conversation started. So Amanda, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm so excited to be here. I am likewise very honored to be included and so excited that folks are tuning in. I also just wanted to say I'm very thankful for the work that you do, Tara, because I am a news junkie myself. I have a degree in journalism, and I think I am the only person under 40 who still religiously watches local news. So I'm very glad for you to fill in this space.
Thank you. No, it's so important. And actually, Kitty had outdated stats, which is my fault, but we are now in 11 newsrooms because we just opened Courier, Texas. We hard launched it last week, and Amanda and I actually ran into each other in Austin, serendipitously last weekend. And so we're very excited to build. I wish that we had been there sooner. I wish we could be in the fight more so. But that's what we're hoping to do, is be able to get more stories like Amanda's out there, and also to bring these stories to the states that don't yet have these horrific bans that we're going to talk about, but absolutely will if Republicans win the presidential race, and certainly other races up and down the ballot that we're going to talk about. So before we get into all of that, though, I know, Amanda, you have made it your job in such a selfless and incredibly brave way to share your story. I think for folks who don't know you or your story well, on this briefing, it would be great, just, whatever you are comfortable sharing about the harrowing experience you had.
Yeah. So I got into this fight and started doing this work, kind of, I guess, just from life circumstances. It was definitely not something I ever thought I would be doing. Speaking on the main stage at the DNC was not on my life bingo card, that is for sure. But how I got here is because of where I live in Texas, which has one of the most cruel extreme abortion bans in the country. And I was a survivor of those. I was pregnant in 2022, and it was a baby that Josh and I wanted more than anything. We worked for 18 months to conceive her. We were absolutely over the moon to be pregnant. But like a lot of pregnancies, mine didn't go as planned. And at 18 weeks, I suffered complications that would cause us to inevitably lose the baby. So there was no way that doctors could reverse course at this point. And at that point, what I should have been able to receive, what would have been standard care, would have been an abortion so that I could deliver the baby that wasn't going to survive. But the ban in Texas had gone into effect. And so an abortion or ending the pregnancy would have been considered an abortion, which is now illegal in Texas because the baby's heart was still beating. So I had to wait until either her heart stopped beating or I met the medical exception in Texas, which is life of the mother. And so for 3 days, we just monitored to see essentially which one would happen first. And after 3 days, it was me first, and I went into septic shock. I almost died. My parents, my mom, by the way, who's on this call, flew in from Indiana because doctors were afraid that I wasn't going to survive. And then I spent about a week total in the hospital. And while I was still in the hospital, Josh and I were like, this is crazy. Like, how is this happening? How is this our reality? And so when I was even still in the hospital, we decided, like, we're going to do something about it. Now, we had no idea it was going to turn into what it has. But we knew that we wanted to speak up and fight back. And so it's just kind of snowballed since then.
It is not only just unimaginable what you and Josh went through and have been through, but unimaginable to think about you guys going through the news that you received about your daughter and your pregnancy, and having to make incredibly hard decisions and ask hard questions, and be faced with the answers that you got from your healthcare providers. Can you talk a little bit about those conversations, and also how you experienced the health providers experiencing them?
Yeah, so that was honestly one of the worst parts. Is I had a great relationship with my OBGYN. I had seen her for about 8 years, and we were very close. And when she told me that we were going to lose the baby, that first and foremost was the worst news ever. And she was heartbroken. This is not news that a doctor wants to deliver. And then when I said, okay, so what happens now? What do we do next? She had to tell me, there's nothing I can do because of the law where we live that just went into effect. It was that week, by the way, that the law went into effect in Texas. And she said, you know, we're still navigating this law. We don't know exactly what we can do, but we know that this would be considered illegal. So we're just going to have to wait. And watching her tell me that, I mean, it was excruciating for me because I couldn't comprehend. I was like, what do you mean we just have to wait? And seeing the pain that she was in and the anguish that she was in, that I think any doctor would be in, whether we had a close, you know, years-long relationship or not, was awful. I mean, when doctors become physicians, they take an oath. They want to help their patients. They want to protect their patients. And she flat out couldn't do it. And throughout the time that I spent both in the 3-day waiting period and then delivery and then being in the hospital afterwards, I mean, I met so many healthcare providers that were just distraught at what was happening in their hospital. And it just breaks my heart to know that they literally are not allowed to perform their jobs.
It's astounding, and it's cruel, right? We hear, we're around the same age. Abortion has been made a political issue, certainly our whole lives in this country and long before that. And a line that, you know, advocates for reproductive rights and freedom, of which that's the issue I certainly came into the work of politics and media many, many years ago for, because it's so personal to us. It's our bodies. I don't ever understand people who don't see that or can't make sense of it, especially women, which we were talking about a little bit before we got on this Zoom. But you know, abortion is healthcare, and that seems to be, you know, sort of received by people who are opposed to abortion for whatever reasons as, you know, a political talking point or something of that nature. But this is literally what you experienced. You experienced being denied life-saving health care. And the health providers have been also some of the most important and effective messengers on this, because across all the states we have newsrooms in. We also have newsrooms in North Carolina and Arizona and Florida, where there are abortion bans as well. It has been folks like you and the health providers that have experienced these traumas that have also had to then come out and be the ones to share their stories, to make them real for people. And it's just the highest act of bravery and selflessness, in my opinion, patriotism that we've seen. And I just really want to honor that and honor you, because it's such a difficult choice to do after going through a trauma, to make that trauma public and to use it to try to help other people. And can you talk us through sort of how then, I mean, you said you and Josh made the decision right there in the hospital, which is profound. What do you think was about that felt obvious to you, that you needed to do something about it beyond just care for yourself and your family after having gone through that experience?
Yeah. Honestly, it was fear and terror that what happened to me would happen to other people. And at first we were thinking, you know, okay, this is Texas. Other Texans are going to suffer. This is going to be really, really bad. And then we started thinking, and as more and more bans got passed across the country, we started realizing, okay, this isn't actually just a Texas problem. This is across the South, across eventually the country, as it keeps spreading and spreading. And, you know, we got to talking and we got to thinking about it. And we realized that what happened to me, like, I was the best case scenario. I've said that before, because, you know, I had a job that allowed me to take the time that I needed. Josh had a job that allowed him to take the time he needed. We don't have other children that we needed to worry about childcare for. We have health insurance. We live in a big city with access to great healthcare, you would think. And so with all of those things in place, I still almost died. And so we just got to thinking, this is going to be so much worse for the people that don't have any of those opportunities that we have. And I fully recognize and am aware of the privilege that I have in this situation. And we started thinking about people that aren't as privileged as us. And it just felt like, how could we not speak up for other people? We absolutely have to. You know, and like I said, we didn't know it was going to turn into what it did. We were hoping one person somewhere might hear our story, and now it's turned into something much bigger. And we're so proud of everyone who comes forward, be it other patients, physicians who are putting their licenses on the line. People are really galvanized by this issue, and it just makes me really proud to see people speaking up.
Absolutely. And you have been doing it tirelessly, and it's such an act of courage. And talk a little bit about what have been some of the more kind of surprising encounters, for better or for worse, that you and Josh have experienced after you decided to talk. And you can speak also about the lawsuit. I know folks know you were the lead plaintiff in the case in Texas, but tell us a little bit about that experience and what has been surprising.
Yeah, the lawsuit was definitely a surprise. I have never sued anyone before. I've never had a lawyer before. These were not things that I thought I would need in my lifetime. But that just kind of grew out of our early activism and advocacy. We just met some folks. After many people kept saying, "Are you going to sue?" We started thinking, okay, well, all right, maybe we should sue. Didn't know who or how, but then we were connected through the Center for Reproductive Rights, who represented us. And after talking to them, that's when we kind of figured out, okay, this is something feasible. And even if we don't win the suit, it felt like a win-win situation, because either we win and yay, or we don't win, but hopefully we can make enough of a splash that people hear about it. And, hopefully their hearts and minds will start changing on this issue. Maybe their votes will change on this issue. And so that was a big surprise. Everything about the lawsuit was very eye-opening. I learned a lot of things that I never thought I would need or want to know, but it was all, it was a very positive experience, even though we didn't end up winning. The community and the love and the support that came out of it was really wonderful. And then I think the other biggest surprise was when, related to the lawsuit, we were contacted by some documentary filmmakers, and they said, "We'd like to make a documentary about this lawsuit and about your life." And prior to this point, I did not lead a life that I thought would be worthy of documenting. And so that was a big surprise too. But similarly, it was equally as positive and loving, that experience working with this documentary crew. It was produced by a company that's backed by Hillary and Chelsea Clinton, and it actually just premiered at Telluride Film Festival, not last weekend, but the weekend before. So that experience was great too. But again, not something I ever would have expected. But I think that goes to show how much people care about this issue. And people want to see this film. It's not in distribution yet, but people care about this issue. And it's just clear to me over and over and over again.
Absolutely. And I want to just underscore the organization that got you involved in the lawsuit that you mentioned, the Center for Reproductive Rights. That's actually how I came to know about you a little over a year ago. I think it's how a lot of people did for the first time. They're such an incredible organization that does really incredible work. So yeah, I think Kitty's already on top of it, putting a way to support them in the chat. I love it. So yeah, and I am actually, I'm sure a lot of folks here are curious about it. I mean, taking again a tragedy and becoming an advocate, you are not an activist, you are not a political strategist like I used to be, thrown into this. Like, you're doing this for literally all of the right, good-hearted reasons. And as you mentioned, motivated by fear. It's also just really brave, because this is an incredibly polarizing issue, as you know, and I think and hope that it's becoming less so after Dobbs, because of the incredible outpouring and sort of surge of folks of all political persuasions in states like Kansas and Ohio that turned out and voted for protections on abortion, for ballot initiatives and measures, so not connected to parties or candidates. And we know now that well over 70% of Americans support abortion access in this country. I think that was always the case, but maybe some were scared to say it because it was more of a political cudgel, or made that way by the right wing. And so I'm curious, what has your experience been with conversations or folks that have shared their story with you about how it's changed their perspective on politics since Dobbs, or since hearing stories like yours?
Yeah, it's been incredible. Honestly, a little bit overwhelming. I've had folks reach out, sometimes strangers, sometimes people that I've met along the campaign trail or through my advocacy. Sometimes it's been childhood friends that I haven't talked to in 20 years. And these are folks who have come to me to say, you know, your story and stories like yours. And when I tell my story, I'm really telling the story of so many other people who have been through something similar. And they're hearing these stories and they're realizing that it's not as black and white as maybe they thought. And so I'm seeing firsthand people change the way that they think about this topic. And what's been really encouraging to me is some of those folks who are like, you know, I've always been super pro-life or anti-choice or however they want to phrase it. And I live in this conservative area. I'm part of this conservative religious community, but I am talking about this in a different way because of what I'm hearing in the news and because of your story and other stories that I've heard. And so, you know, I have said data is great, that helps motivate people, but really what motivates people is personal stories. And that's why I think it's so important for us to keep speaking out and keep sharing stories, because that's what's really going to change people's hearts and minds. And I'm seeing it firsthand all over the country. It's been really remarkable. And to your point, I think people always have been, but they didn't have the space to talk about it and think about it in this way. And I think we are breaking down a lot of the barriers and a lot of the stigma that has been put in place through politics. And to me, that's what's the most encouraging, is that people are realizing like, oh, actually, abortion access and abortion care is just healthcare.
Absolutely. And it is really inspiring, and there's a lot of hope and optimism in that. And yet it's also so up that it would take actual bans and people having experiences like yours, people dying, right? All of the stories that we're not hearing, folks that are not as brave as you to come out or don't have the ability, as you mentioned, and the privilege possibly to do that. And I think about that all the time in some states, that it's how powerful stories by even just a few individuals can be for all of the stories that we don't hear. And, you know, that there isn't media to cover, or they're not focused on it because they're only focused on the sort of political elements of it. What role is this issue going to play in an election? And I'm curious kind of how you're experiencing that. As you're a surrogate for the Harris Walz campaign, and an incredible one. And you were at the convention, as you mentioned, and actually it's funny because Tim Walz referenced you without naming you in his response to learning about Taylor Swift actually endorsing last night, because he was talking about the bravery of women speaking out about these things that affect them so deeply and so intimately. And so, you know, we don't want this to be a political issue. It absolutely should not be a political issue. It still is, unfortunately, or at least that's how it's portrayed, even though, again, I think that we're seeing that women, regardless of how, you know, they've voted in the past or what other values they might hold, are moving on this issue. But, you know, how are you experiencing the political side of it now that you're in the middle of that, as someone who didn't work in politics before? And you know, how do you see us moving it away from being a political issue if you do see that as being possible?
Man, being in this political world that I have never been a part of has been another surprising whirlwind, eye-opening experience. You know, I was always interested and always informed, and I think I volunteered for Beto's campaign, Beto O'Rourke here in Texas. But other than that, you know, I was not active. I certainly was not an activist or anything like that. But I just kind of dove in when the campaign, what was the Biden campaign, called me in January and said, hey, we're making this a key pillar of our campaign. Would you be interested in being a surrogate? I think I said, hell yeah, where do I sign up? And, you know, as the campaign has evolved and how the election has evolved, I've learned a lot. But it's an interesting question, because right now, reproductive health and abortion access is such a crucial part of politics. And I think that's important to note, that the Democratic ticket is obviously making it a huge part of their platform. And I think that's to their advantage, and I think it's going to help them. Now, after we hopefully have a Harris-Walz administration, I hope that then it can become not such a political issue. And I hope that we can restore access and restore protections, and then it just becomes about healthcare again. And I hope that stories like mine go away. I hope we don't hear them anymore, because right now, every single day, it's happening. It's happening to someone right now, somewhere in our country. And if we can restore those protections and those freedoms, those stories will start to dissipate and eventually, hopefully, cease existing altogether. And I think the more we talk about it now, and we do talk about it in a way that's not political, and it's not stigmatized and it's not polarizing, hopefully it can become just people seeing this is just healthcare, and this is just simply a right that we as Americans should all have. So let's protect it and let's move on.
Absolutely. And there are so many democratic nations around the world that actually this is not a political issue or a debate anymore. It is treated as healthcare as it should be. And I think we can and will get there. And it's such a cruel shame that we're not yet, and that we're still in the heat of this fight. But so grateful for you for doing everything that you are doing on this. I also want to touch on just the debate, because it was last night and Harris did absolutely crush Trump, but I actually felt the most important moment, and the moment where she won the debate, was very early on. And it was when she did talk about abortion, and she did mention the very personal sides. And I also experienced, which I'm sure you did too, Amanda, and most people watching this did, how personal it was for her, right? To be the one talking about this. It wasn't performative. It wasn't talking about it as a political issue. And it may have been the only time in my life, and I am a student of Donald Trump because I have been working against him since 2015 every day, but there was a moment where you saw him wince when she was talking about how no one makes a choice to have a late-term abortion. No one makes that choice. It is not something that anybody ever wants, and how they've weaponized that is so cruel. And he needed to retreat. I thought it was one of the most powerful moments in politics I've ever actually seen. I'm really curious how you experienced that exchange.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think, he uses a lot of these insane arguments as just talking points that are just not reality. These 7-month, 8-month, 9-month terminations, like, no one does that. We know that. No one willingly does that. That's a ridiculous argument. His line about after birth abortion, I mean, it's just insane. These things are not reality. He's not living in reality. And the way that Kamala Harris addressed it, I agree. It was so personal. It was so beautiful. And she painted the picture that I think he had to sit with. This is the reality. This is what's happening to people as a result of you and your policies. This is what people are dealing with. And being face to face with him, I agree with you. You could see his discomfort. And I was like, yeah, go girl, go. And I will tell you, like, it is very personal for her. I have had the great fortune of being able to spend some time with her, and interacting with her a handful of times. And she cares deeply and genuinely about not just this issue, but also the American people. And that's something else I applaud her for last night. Donald Trump talked about himself, and he talked about attacking her over and over, and she talked about the American people and what she's going to do for Americans. And the contrast to me was just so stark. And I mean, it's clear that she just wants to fight for the people, and she wants to protect people. And I think it came through very clearly last night.
Very much so. And I love Joe Biden. I think he'll go down as one of the best presidents in our history, but he nor any male politician could actually ever have advocated that way. And that's not a gendered statement, but it is in certain ways. You couldn't have expected that. And I have always believed it was going to be a woman in charge that was going to put this to rest finally. And I hope that is where we're headed. I want to make sure that we have time for questions for everyone. So my last question for you before I bring Kitty back on to help facilitate questions from the chat and from everybody watching is just, what is one thing that you want folks who are deeply moved by your story, who have resources or capacity or friends or, you know, family in states like Wisconsin or Arizona or Texas, what's the thing that you really want them to do with you know, the emotional and you know, engaged and motivated response they have from hearing your story?
Well, like I said earlier, I think the most powerful thing anyone can do is talk about it and share the story. And what I have learned is almost everyone has their own reproductive health story, or they know someone who has a journey, right? And if you don't, now you know mine. You can share.
Including men, right?
Yes, yes.
Including men.
And you can have these conversations and you can share these stories, whether it's your own or someone else's. I think those are the most powerful interactions that we can have, whether it's around your kitchen table or, you know, like my friend who contacted me after not talking for 20 years, not just because we grew apart. You know, she's having these conversations in her very conservative religious community. These are the things that are going to really change the way that we think about this topic as a nation. If you want to do more than that, if you want to get political, there's tons of opportunities to volunteer. I'm happy to send along some resources if folks are interested in that. If you have the capacity, the interest in donating money, certainly the campaign would be happy to take your donations. But I also think at the local level is really important too. So obviously we have a giant presidential election, but who you elect locally is really important too. From senators all the way down to city council, they have maybe more power than a lot of people realize. And I just encourage folks to really pay attention to who's on their ballot, learn about who they're voting for, and really do your homework and make sure that the people you are voting for support the causes that you really care about.
Hear, hear. Well, thank you, Amanda, so much. I'm so honored to meet you and be in conversation with you. And empathy and bravery are contagious. So thank you for spreading both.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. That was a great conversation. So I'd love to sort of get into the way that we do tell these stories. So I'd love to sort of hear, Tara, you sort of talk about like how you prioritize the stories that you guys tell, and then how you also would use stories like Amanda's to reach your audience. How do you do both so skillfully? Because it is really magnificent what you guys do.
Thank you, Kitty. You know, I think the biggest challenge for any news organization or media company is how do you cover everything that's happening when there are attacks on all sorts of our rights and freedoms all over the place, from local to state level to this presidential election. So we are a pretty big operation now, still small in my opinion for what we could and should be, but we have over 105 full-time employees now. We have a minimum of 5 full-time reporters and social media correspondents in each of our 11 states. And then we have nationals, the thing folks should follow if they haven't, if you're in our 11 states, you should absolutely follow and share those accounts. But our national is what Kitty's referencing, that we do a lot on things like Project 2025 and tell the stories of folks outside of our states that we can bring into our states as well. So I'm the publisher. I obviously have I have some influence over what is covered, but we have amazing editors and reporters who really determine that. And what we do is we set at the organizational level the coverage areas that we think are most undercovered and most important to the audiences we serve. And at Courier, outside of our national account, all of our state newsrooms are focused on people who do not engage proactively with political news or information. They don't watch cable news. They don't listen to talk radio. They don't pay through paywalls, which is where most local and national news today is trapped. These are people who have multiple jobs. They're people with young children. They're people who are just living their lives. And they don't frankly have time for it, or it's not the biggest interest to them. And certainly most of our news and information today is not really relevant to most people. And so a big part of our work at Courier is how do we actually start with the personal stories and then connect the dots to the candidates and the elections that are going to have an impact on those decisions and on those rights and freedoms. And so from day one of Courier's existence, reproductive rights and freedom have been one of our biggest coverage areas. We have a lot of underwriting support to be able to cover it because, as I mentioned, we have 4 states on our map that have near total abortion bans. And so covering the fights and the votes in the state houses that led to these, the contested lawsuits, et cetera, it's so important. We're going to be doing that work in Texas, and Amanda's already generously agreed to do some work with us too, so we can get our story in front of more people. I actually was on the phone with Congressman Allred, who's running against Ted Cruz for the Senate seat in Texas yesterday. And when I asked what was one of the big gaps or problem areas they saw, they actually mentioned specifically that a lot of people in the state still don't know how egregious and dangerous and life-threatening this ban is. They need to hear Amanda's story. Amanda is a peer. She is a neighbor. She is a fellow Texan with them. And so that's the type of work that we do. So we really prioritize the things that are, unfortunately most at risk or at stake related to our rights and freedoms to cover them and to work with folks like Amanda to be able to get their story out in as genuine and respectful way as possible, but in a way that people will relate to and share, because we're all focused on social first content, so it reaches more people. And that's, what Amanda said is telling these stories and sharing these stories. You never know who it's going to touch or what mind it's going to change, but it is, especially because you have your own clout and currency as an individual who people trust and respect in your community. So they may never tell you that it changed their vote or their opinion of something by seeing a video or a post that you shared, but it happens every day. So we really focus on those issues that matter. LGBTQ plus rights, the anti-trans bills in so many of our states has also been a big coverage area for us because frankly, there's no one else covering it. We know the New York Times actually wrote, I forget the numbers, I don't want to botch them, but an enormous amount of stories about anti-trans legislations that had absolutely no interviews with trans individuals. So representation matters of people's stories and the impacts these really, really, really terrifying pieces of legislation and extremist agenda by the MAGA right have on people's lives. So that's everything that we strive to do, is just try to get the stories into as many places as possible. So people who won't see them otherwise are seeing them in their TikTok or their Instagram or their Facebook newsfeed.
Amanda, you were talking before when you were telling your story about even in the moment of anguish and grief, you were realizing how fortunate you were that you had, obviously you both had jobs, you had healthcare, you were able, to take care of yourself, take time off. I'd love to hear what, it sounds like you've sort of built a community with other women, not only in Texas, but around the country, who also have been impacted by abortion bans. I'd love to hear you sort of talk to us a little bit about the diversity of these women and their stories and that community. And then Tara, I'd love to hear how you at Courier sort of think about implanting this perspective into how you're telling these stories.
I appreciate that question. I'm very interested, Tara, to hear your thoughts, because the diversity piece, as far as people who are being impacted, there is a ton of diversity. The diversity in the stories that we hear, there's not as much there. And I think that's, it makes sense to me, because we know that it's oftentimes harder for people of color to tell these types of stories and to speak out in their communities. And I have heard that from a lot of people, be it through general advocacy, through the campaign. They have a different layer of fear. And I recognize that. I respect that. I think that also gives me motivation to continue telling my story, because I don't have those same barriers. And so I would be interested, Tara, to hear how we can help elevate those types of stories and those types of voices, because also we know that these types of bans disproportionately impact people of color, yet we don't get to hear their voices as much as I think we should. And so it is a really important piece. I think something that we can all be doing to help break down those barriers and alleviate some of that fear is, again, continue talking about it in our own communities so that it's not as scary, it's not as much of a stigmatized, politicized issue, and people do feel more comfortable coming out. And the more of us that talk about this, we're stronger in numbers, right? And if we have this community, if we're all doing it and talking about it, suddenly it becomes less scary. And so that's what I think we can do as a community. But Tara, from your perspective, I'm sure there's much more that you can do.
Yeah, no, and I also really, really appreciate the question and agree with Amanda that it's just true that there is more at risk, and there is for women of color in particular, they already have a much worse go at healthcare in this country, right? Like with everything else, when women are marginalized in any way by society or institutions, women of color are marginalized worse than white women, and affected more deeply. And so, I was thinking through like the actual coverage across our different states, and our newsroom in North Carolina actually did this incredible series last year on Black women's mothers' mortality, because the maternal mortality rate for Black women is so much higher than for white women. And they did this incredible series and honestly leaned very heavily on physicians and doctors who can talk about some of their patients without naming them or things of that nature, to bring up some of these stories and to talk about the much worse impacts and worse numbers and statistics for some of this stuff related to reproductive care, maternal health care, everything of that nature. And so I think that's one way I know that we have done it, is lean on the physicians and other folks who have been impacted or know these impacted individuals. But there's always more that can be done. And I couldn't agree more with Amanda that we know permission structures work. Like I said, bravery is contagious. When people tell their personal story and other people hear it, it does open up something in others that they feel they could do the same thing. And it's being able to give them a safe space to do that. And I think and hope that that's what our reporters and our newsrooms provide, and certainly want to be able to offer to folks. We can't protect people from everything, right? As a news organization, there is an element of risk that you take, but I do think that the courage and bravery of folks like Amanda and others can open the door to more people. I also need to lift up that there's a lot of bravery happening and activism happening that shouldn't be in the public sphere, right? There's a lot of folks that are working to make sure that women are getting out of these states to get the healthcare they need, that people are protected from the criminalization of abortion and of physicians in these states. And, this is what we're trying to avoid ultimately, but we also need to have in the interim is essentially underground reproductive care, physicians being trained to give abortions so that they can do this. This is the reality we always know. You ban abortion, it doesn't actually eliminate abortion. It just makes it less safe. It makes it more dangerous. It makes more women die, more families impacted. And so there is an enormous amount of invisible bravery and activism that is happening and will continue to happen, that, those are the stories we actually have to tell to each other, but shouldn't be publishing externally. But people need to know that they're there, even if they're not seeing them or reading about them, because those acts of heroism are necessary and absolutely prevalent.
Okay, can we just do a little analysis of mainstream media? I'd love to get both your perspective on how you think the mainstream media, I don't even like that term, is doing at sharing abortion stories like yours, Amanda.
I personally not by my own choice. I think it's the algorithms, right? But I think I live in a bit of an echo chamber. And so I think that, the news that I consume does a great job of amplifying voices like mine and stories like mine. I don't know what's going on Fox News. I assume that they don't even know that I exist, that this whole movement doesn't exist. I will say, though, in all seriousness, it was startling to me this morning, even when I'm listening to the Today Show, because again, Tara, I'm the only person under 40 who still consumes regular news. But their top story, like within the first 10 seconds of the show, they said the word abortion and how it was a main topic of the debate last night. And I like, even through everything that I've been doing and all of the work that's being done across the country and everything that's gone on in the last 2 years, I was still surprised, because I was like, okay, all right, yes, like we're just talking about it, 7 a.m., no problem. And that to me was so encouraging. And I hear that all the time, whether it's my local news or it's something like the Today Show. I think they're finally coming to the table. I think for a while they were still dancing around it, and they were saying, you know, oh, women's health issues or reproductive care topics, you know, they were very soft cuddling around it, but finally it's like front and center. And I think that's unfortunately because it's a tool for politics, but it is helping to break down barriers, and we are hearing it a lot more consistently and with a lot less stigma, which is so encouraging and really exciting.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think part of the reason I think is that support for abortion is more mainstream than any media outlets today. So they actually can't ignore it. And that's a really good thing. That is what is happening in this pivotal moment in the movement, because of folks having to go through the horrific traumas and experiences that you did, Amanda, but then having the bravery to share them. And so that is a positive. And, you know, whenever I get frustrated with legacy or traditional media, right, cable news or legacy publications like New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, what have you, the only silver lining is that they're actually not reaching that many people. They're reaching very influential people. So they still matter a great deal. They still do play a big role setting the narrative. Obviously, right-wing media is incredibly influential at setting the narrative for the media. But what's encouraging is the rise of real people. Call them content creators, whether they're paid, they're influential, et cetera. Everyone has influence now. Everybody has a platform now on whatever platforms they engage with or share on or are voyeurs on. It still matters. And so that's where I think, you know, there isn't a gatekeeper of what is newsworthy or what is political or not anymore, because we are flooded every day with people's real stories. To Amanda's point, algorithms can be the gatekeeper then, and that's a challenge. And that's something that we work really hard at Courier. We don't ever expect anyone to find our stories or content, regardless of if they live in the communities we serve. We need to go to them with that. We actually have to target with them with boosting our news with advertising dollars to break through the algorithms, or to actually seed the content into WhatsApp threads or Reddit threads where they are actually going for information, or bring them in through non-political or non-issue advocacy reporting and content to get them to see, as we say, the vegetables of these stories, to pay attention. But I do think abortion is moving. It's getting to a place, and we saw it on Trump's face, and we see it in how the Republican Party is flip-flopping and really freaked out because they went way too far. They went way too far. They have caused death and destruction and threatening people's lives and immense trauma that will exist for generations to come from these bans. And that's why it's so important that we defeat them in every single state house and in the White House and every Senate and House race that we have, because we can make this actually a non-issue and have it just be treated the way that it needs to be, which is reproductive health care. And I think that we are getting the closest we have ever been with the greatest threats that have come.
So thank you so much for all your work. We've got 55 days to go, everyone. It's time to work really hard, just like Tara and Amanda are. We can't wait to see you all under the tent again. Thank you so much. Amanda, Tara, have a great night.